I've got the author, the man himself, James Brown, the author of Animal House. What it was like to be on the inside of the publishing phenomenon that was Loaded. Delighted to be joining me from a park in London, not a field in Hampshire, James Brown himself. Afternoon to you, James.
Afternoon, Giles. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Good to speak to you again. You see, we liked you so much, we got you on a second time around.
Thank you very much. I love to be on the radio.
Exactly. Now, listen, it's really funny because we were talking about the hedonism of the 90s and rock and roll publishing. Just tell the listeners where you are and what you're doing now, you rock and roll animal.
I'm actually at a place called Four Quarters, which is a retro gaming bar in the Olympic Park next to the West Ham Stadium in London. It's half term, so I've taken my little boy to the retro arcade. So that's what we've been doing.
Absolutely brilliant. Did you ever think that you'd have that quiet sort of family lad, because you were lad culture, but certainly not lad and dad culture?
Well, one of the reasons I got sober was I thought at one point I don't want to be crawling around on the floor drunk when I've got a kid. So that kind of flashed through my mind once back in those Loaded days, but just life moves on, doesn't it? You know, kind of you do different things.
Yeah,
you become a parent, and you're not the most important person in the world anymore.
Indeed. So, for those who don't know, I mean, Loaded was a phenomenon. I mean, there'd been nothing like it before. All men's magazines were very highbrow, like Esquire or GQ, etc. And who came to you with the idea, or was it your idea? How did you actually get involved?
Yes, I know it was my idea. I had started my career on the NME, writing about bands, and not long after I left that, they called me up and asked me if I would come back and be interviewed with the editor. And in those discussions, the mooted an idea of what would I do if I had my own magazine. So that's how it started. I said I would have I would have like a magazine like Arena, but edited by Hunter Thompson. And it would be about football, because as you mentioned, there were a few magazines for men around, like GQ and Esquire and Arena, but were very highbrow, very interested in our sort of an aspirational and actually unaffordable lifestyle for most of me and my mates who would spend our money on football and clubbing. And so it was just really to create a magazine that was like the life I was living, which, you know, I was seeing a lot of comedians, we go away on cheap holidays, having a laugh with your mates down the pub. I wanted to create a magazine that was like my life was like, rather than the fantasy life that kind of those American magazines like GQ suggested we get.
Everybody getting out of their Aston Martins with their Hugo Boss suits on, etc. And in the meantime, we wanted to get down there by happy hour. The other thing is the fact that by lucky happenstance, we had Britpop. Suddenly, it was called Britannia, and people were going, "This magazine is brilliant because it talks like we do." And there was, it wasn't as if we were at the end of the 80s and it was big hair bands. It was Blur, it was Oasis, it was Pulp. There was that whole London was buzzing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, from Acid House onwards, Britain had great music. Whether it was club music or then the emergence of Manchester in the late 80s, early 90s, which is something I wrote a lot about at NME. So by the time Loaded came out in 1994, I was very much thinking that it would be read by the sort of people who would go and see New Order, or the generation before them had watched The Jam, or the Happy Mondays audience, the Stone Roses audience, and because those people had had the best of like kind of rock and roll music, but also the clubbing scene, and where those two cultures crossed over, it was a perfect sort of sweet spot for us. And the thing with Loaded was it was virgin territory. No one had ever produced a mass market men's magazine before. And actually the industry laughed. They said it wouldn't work. But women had been reading mass market magazines for all age groups, from 15-year-olds to 75-year-olds for years. And I just felt if we made a good magazine that guys would buy it. And one of the keys for me was just combining my two loves, which was football and music. There were so many good players around in the mid-90s. There were so many good bands, as you'd mentioned, that we were never short of people to write about. So I also think there was a sort of an energy and atmosphere at the end of the 90s. It wasn't only the end of a decade or a century. It was the end of a millennium. And it felt very much like life was running on last orders, that sort of sense of we've got 8 minutes to drink these 5 pints people have put down. And it felt like that. It was a very hedonistic time. There was obviously a huge array of narcotics kicking around. The ecstasy boom was kind of going strong still. And so life had just, in Britain in particular, had loosened up. Kind of British people, the younger British people had discovered the Balearics. Yeah. Remember, we had by 97, we had things like EasyJet coming in and then Ryanair. So suddenly people could get around a lot cheaper. And so I think it was just a real sense of the UK was relaxing. And then they changed the licensing laws, which was just like amazing. I explain this to sort of younger people I know now, that you had 2 hours to drink in the middle of the day, and then you had 4.5 every night, and there was nowhere to go. There was just nowhere to go at after 11:15 unless you knew. I mean, I lived in London, so there were lots of sort of little sneaky drinking dens in Soho. But what I found when I went throughout Britain on our sort of loaded events, or just going to clubs or whatever, there was this just shared enthusiasm and enjoyment of what was going on in the club culture and the new sort of bar culture. The city that I am from, Leeds, was referred to as the Barcelona of the North, which, if you've been to Barcelona and Leeds, was a very wild claim. But there was just this sense of Britain sort of throwing off the shackles. It was less uptight. And Loaded was just smack in the middle of all that. As I said, right about the TV, the bands, the clubs, the comedians, the travel. And we never thought we were better than the readers. We always wanted to include the readers. And they recognised themselves, I think, in the magazines. Because
that's the thing. If you start talking down to your readership, then you're mucked. And also, it's interesting. You talk about the flights. I remember that Loaded did a magazine shoot in Marbella. I'm sitting here now in Marbella, yeah. And it was if another magazine came, it would all be supermodels and, as I said, Lamborghinis. But this was like a couple of guys having a great time in a villa in Marbella. That was it. That was the whole shoot, to promote the fact that people could get over here.
I mean, we were never short of volunteers to go abroad every month. but I mean, do you remember the school trip, Giles? How exciting the school trip was. We basically went on a school trip every month, and whether we were in Amsterdam or Ibiza or New York or South America or Scotland, wherever we went, we just found people who liked having a good time, and many of the articles in Loaded were just about the staff and the readers having a good time, rather than superstars like Brian Ferry or David Bowie, as had been the case with the previous era of magazines.
But also, of course, let's talk the sport, because you've written obviously about football. It's your passion. Euro '96 was a game changer in the way for what everything converged at that point. And I'm not looking back on rose tinted glasses, but I was in London when we beat the Dutch, and I remember, and when we beat Spain on penalties, and Pearce scored the penalty, and the whole London and the whole nation just lifted in a way that we hadn't seen before.
Yeah, I mean, it was just one thing after the other. It was brilliant. We had Gazza on after that summer. Gazza on the cover, and he just joined Rangers, and there was just great things kept happening. I can remember being at that 5-1 against Holland at half time. I think we might be 4-0 up or something. I just remember staring at the scoreboard and thinking, "This is Holland." This is like in the 70s, 74, 78, which was I was 8 and 13 when those World Cups happened, or 8 and 14. They were like, no, it wouldn't be right. 8 and 12 when they were like, for me, they were the best team in the world. So for us to be looking at that team and thinking we're hammering them, and that's, you remember just before Euro '96, the Sun had tried to kind of sort of, they've done the dentist chair photograph,
the Hong Kong trip.
Yeah, and on the Hong Kong trip, and they were really down. They were doing their age-old thing of trying to show the players up, and then actually the country, England got behind the English team, and Gazza emerged, yet still had it. Because Gazza had kind of burst on the international team kind of 7 years before, just before 1990, but he still had it. and it was just, I don't know, it was a perfect time. I remember that summer, Oasis played Nebworth, the Sex Pistols reformed, and England did really well at football. It was like a perfect summer to be a magazine editor covering that stuff, or just to be a young man or woman enjoying football and music.
And the art scene as well. We had Damien Hirst, who was like the new British artist as well, and they were cutting a thrust through Soho and falling out the Groucho and all fun and games. How did you manage to actually still bring a magazine out there? Because people tend to think that it was just basically one big pub crawl.
I mean, it was really good fun. It was good fun writing down what we'd been doing on these trips. It was good fun hearing the sub-editors laughing, reading your stories. Or for me, I got to read all the stories first. So it never felt like work. And when something does that, I mean, like yourself, you do the radio show, it doesn't feel like work. You like chatting with people and like talking to your listenership. I think if you're enjoying what you do, it's very easy to work hard at it. And Loaded was so big within, I don't know, maybe about 18 months. We were doing 250, then up to 300, then 350 page issues. And it was like the Yellow Pages after 18 months. Yeah. You've got to remember, this is a publication that only had 3 months worth of budget, because even the company producing it, who I'd talked into launching it, didn't think it was going to work.
Wow.
So it took off, and then there were the other magazines that copied it, like FHM and Maxim and Front later on. And then, this happened around the world. I was taken to Australia, to Sweden, to America to talk to the scenes there and the companies there, the publishing industry, about what we were doing. And it was just simple. It was in the same way as Cosmopolitan had reflected how women probably were in the early 70s. That's what Loaded did. It was a more realistic reflection of, men of all ages who didn't take themselves too seriously. And who had, as you said at the beginning, no passion. My passion is football. The passions that people had, you could come to Loaded and enjoy, whatever it was. We had a very, very broad editorial view. And we were always positive about things as well. It wasn't snidey. We weren't cynical or critical of stuff. We basically just raved about stuff that we loved doing.
And also the front covers, which were brilliant, and there was a great sense of humour. But also, you'd put stuff on a front cover because you'd liked the look of something.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example of what it was like. It was very hard to get good photographs of footballers in those days. Nowadays, they've all got sponsorship deals, and the clubs and the brands that do the shirts and the boots want the players to look good, so they all do their own personal shoots and they do their club shoots. But we sent a photographer up to take a picture of Kevin Keegan, who was flying high at Newcastle then. It was the year that everybody thought they were going to win the league, and he had Shearer and he had Les Ferdinand and Espria and David Ginola, David Batty, Philip Albert. It was a really, really good team, and the interview was great, very positive. And then the photographs came in, and he looked like a depressed fish. He looked grumpy and miserable. And the photographer's a really good photographer. He just came and he said, "I'm really sorry." He wouldn't pose for colour, and he just really didn't want to engage. So I just remember looking at this picture of this sort of grey-eyed guppy, and we had the layout on a piece of paper, and I was looking at it, and I got a red crayon, and I just drew glasses on him, and I told the art director to put that on the cover, and they weren't sure if I was being serious or not, but it was the only way to translate Keegan's sulk into the humour that we had in Loaded. This idea of dismantling what a magazine should be and making it more like something you might draw on a beer mat or doodle whilst you're on the phone or something.
And I'm just thinking that when you put Jimmy White on the front cover, because there wasn't, as you said, there wasn't a tournament on, but he was just such a brilliant guy, and he sort of summed up.
Yeah, we didn't want the magazine to be just driven by PR. Maybe the public probably get it now that PR orchestrates so much of what goes on in the media. But I think it was a January or February, and it was just a really great photograph of Jimmy White. And I thought, there's no point waiting until he comes second in a tournament again. Let's just stick it on there. He's somebody that we love. And so it was always that sense of, in fact, I wish I'd done that a bit more, looking back on it. I wish I'd just had more people stockpiled, more legends that we loved, just ready to drop in like that.
So the book, I mean, because obviously you've had, as the saying goes, a lifestyle change, to put it mildly, and suddenly the market was just flooded with copycat magazines. Everyone was doing the same thing, and without the wit and the charm, and we got very close to sort of pornography, basically, with lots of them. When you stepped away, and is it because you are a different person now? It's a different time. You're pre-internet. What's it like going back and going through those and A, writing it for the first time, and B, I mean, seeing the reaction? This has gone to paperback, so obviously people are buying it, and obviously our generation are going, I remember that so well. Yeah.
It wasn't really a lifestyle change for me. I just got an absolutely enormous amount of money to go and edit GQ. And I was struggling to get a pay rise at. I mean, literally, we were making millions of pounds for the people who put the money up to do loaded, and the staff and I weren't seeing any of it. And I turned down a chat show on Channel 4, turned down editing supplements and actual newspapers, tabloids. So I just thought, I'm going to take the next job I get offered. If they don't want to give me a decent rise, I'll go work for somebody who would. So that was kind of a personal point of it. But I also think it's good to keep ahead of what's going on. Somebody tweeted me this week, it was great how I got out before the internet killed magazines. And I chatted to a few friends like that who stayed in magazines, and, I'd be sometimes wish, it'd be quite nice to just do the function of putting the magazine together. A bit like a chef who would like to put a menu together. You don't lose that desire to bring those things together. But my mate said it's been painful for 20 years of redundancies and reduction in costs. And so, you just got to keep moving, really. And
you don't say about a chef and the whole thing about going back and being chefing. Anthony Bourdain famously said that having a restaurant crew, having a kitchen crew, was like having your own pirate situation, your own pirate boat. Well, sub editors, I've worked in magazines. That is the ultimate, isn't the ultimate pirate? I mean, chef's not a choice, but magazine, sub editors, editors at large. I mean, they really are a pirate crew.
Well, I mean, it's just that sense of, I think what we managed to do at Loaded was we managed to transmit that sense of fun that you have, whether you're men or women, with a gang of mates. And we always wanted the magazine to feel like a great night out. And to be honest, it doesn't matter what line of work you're in. If you've got good colleagues who are a great laugh, then it's a joy to be around them. And I think the difference between us and, say, a load of people who built ships, whatever, we got to write down about what we were doing. So the readers got to take part in it, and share in it.
And the book's gone to paperback. You must be extremely pleased. What do you hope that people take? Is it that sense of fun? Because it's a snapshot at a decade, at 7 years, if you like, that absolutely were brilliant to be in.
Well, I mean, if you go on my Twitter today at James Brown, I tweeted a picture of the paperback because it's out this week, and it's just been really nice getting this feedback from people who have enjoyed listening to the audio book, or people who bought the hardback just before Christmas. And I kind of forgot that this would happen again. Like we spoke, and we're gonna, before when the hardback comes out, but it's been really successful. And really, I mean, a bit like how the magazine's built, social media is a great way to promote the books, I've sold 400 just from people asking on Twitter, which is, it's good. If you want one, it's at James Brown.
Well, I advise you to go and listen. You're with your kid. Enjoy. What game have you been playing? But are you doing Pac-Man? Are you doing what particular game?
What game were we playing, Billy? Tell Giles what we were playing.
Like an old version of FIFA.
Okay.
And we had an early version of FIFA and car racing and some sort of shoot 'em up. It's a good place, 4 quarters. It's in the Olympic Park.
Right. I shall pop over when I pop over the next time. Then listen, congratulations. I'm so happy for you, mate, and I'm so happy that the book is going. It's going great guns.
To you, Giles.
As always, the book is called Animal House. You'll be able to order it as well online from our own virtual bookstore. Check out James as well on the social media. I stalk him on Instagram, as he probably knows. The book is called Animal House. It's by James Brown. James, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks, Giles.